Welcome to Jane Jackson Careers, a podcast that takes your career to the next level. Here's your host, Jane Jackson, author of Amazon Careers bestseller, Navigating Career Crossroads.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible.com. You can get a free audiobook download and free 30-day trial at audibletrial.com/Jane Jackson Careers. There are over 180,000 book titles to choose, so give it a go and get your free audiobook today from audibletrial.com/Jane Jackson Careers. Well, hello and welcome back to my Careers podcast, where I interview fascinating professionals who have made amazing career changes. Now, what I'm very happy about today is that I'm welcoming back to the show Colin Gray, whom I interviewed several months ago, all about his career journey and how he got into podcasting. But today we've got Colin back to tell us how we can get into podcasting as well. So as a brief intro, Colin is a podcaster, a writer, and a doctor of online education. Throughout that, he's been teaching podcasting skills since 2007 and loving every minute of it. In 2010, he founded the Podcast Host, and since then he's worked with businesses to promote through broadcast and with universities to teach via podcasting. The Podcast Host runs a range of online courses designed to help fledgling podcasters get started and keep learning as they go. These days, Colin writes regularly on podcasting and content marketing, and he produces 5 podcasts along with his team at the Podcast Host. The topics include mountain biking, podcasting, of course, audio drama, subversive leadership, and starting a business. Podcraft is the flagship, a season-based show which tackles podcasting topics head-on over a series of shows, looking to create a definitive guide each time. Colin's also an experienced speaker both in new media and in the academic world, and most recently he was a main track speaker at New Media Europe and spoke at the podcast movement in Texas, USA. So, with all of those amazing credentials behind him, let's welcome Colin onto the show. So, welcome back, Colin.
Hey Jane, how are you getting on?
I'm getting on really well and very happy to have you back. So how about, just to kick us off, and before we get into how to podcast, can you tell us how you actually got into podcasting yourself?
Yeah, sure. I can't remember how much we covered the last time. I'll do the brief history, which was basically that I started off in education, really. Well, I was a web designer originally, but then ended up teaching web design in education. I moved over to technology-enhanced learning. So I was teaching lecturers how to teach effectively using the internet. I guess that's the sort of easy way to say it. And really one of those ways was podcasting. So I was tasked to learn this new fancy technique, which was called podcasting, and how it could be used to teach students. And really that took me down the whole path of learning about the equipment, the presentation skills, the content creation, everything about podcasting, which once I came out of education, I kept doing it and really started working with a lot of people around how to set up their own shows. So these days, we run the Podcast Host, which is a business that aims to help anyone start their own podcast, doing courses or production, and also, doing a few of our own shows as well, try to get some good content out there.
Okay, it sounds amazing. You know, the last time when we spoke, you had Podcraft and you were also doing the mountain biking podcast. But it looks like you've grown. The business has grown. You've got all of these other ones too. This audio drama, subversive leadership. What is that all about? And also starting a business. Can you tell us a little bit about that before we go into how we can start podcasts ourselves?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're always trying to grow out our catalogue here and create more shows, more examples of what we can do, as well as more examples of what everyone else can do, try and inspire people and grow a better audience, I guess. So in the last year or so, the company's really grown quite, dramatically, I suppose, in a way. We've now got a couple of employees and The subversive leadership one, to take as an example, we're calling that path of most resistance, and that's where we're doing interviews with entrepreneurs or artists or sports people or anyone that leads their field, essentially anyone who's a leader in their field, and the credentials are really that you have to be doing things a little bit differently. I suppose you have to be thinking differently from the crowd, jumping the rails and not quite doing it the same as everyone else always does it. So we're trying to draw out lessons really from people who have achieved success through different paths, through thinking a little bit differently and following their own path. So yeah, that's the idea for that one. And really, yeah, the UK business startup one's the other one, which is a 6-part series, which is really heavily produced. Storytelling type of show whereby we take people through the journey of starting a business in the UK. So it's all of the things you have to think about in terms of designing your business, the financials, the planning, all that kind of stuff. And while it's targeted at UK residents in terms of the particular structures that we have here, all of the planning and the marketing and all that applies anywhere around the world. So I suppose anyone could listen to it.
Oh, that sounds great. And so the first one, where you interview the leaders in their field who are doing something really exciting, is called The Path of Most Resistance.
That's the one, yes.
Yeah. Oh, I like that title. and how to start a business. It's called Startup?
It's UK Business Startup.
UK Business Startup. I'm going to have to listen to those. And audio drama. What's the audio drama?
Yeah, so that's one that's in planning. That's not actually out yet. So one of the first guy that started working with me here, Matthew McLean, is he's got a background in audio drama. So we have been thinking about creating an audio drama ourselves, just as a showcase of the skills that are within the company. So that's still in planning. Still thinking about stories. Still trying to work out what we're going to do there. But yeah, hopefully that'll be out within this year, within 2016.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. So it's going to be a lot of storytelling. Are you going to take on the BBC with all of their
yes,
jobs
absolutely.
as well?
Definitely.
Oh, amazing. So you see, this really is exciting because it shows how podcasting can just grow, and your business just in the past few months, it's just flourished. So, it's just so exciting now because I notice more and more people are getting into podcasting, and so many don't really know how to start. And certainly I didn't know how to start at the beginning, and I got inspired simply by listening to your podcasts. So how about, let's have a few tips for people who are thinking about getting into podcasting. First of all, what are the most important things to consider before even getting into podcasting?
I think the biggest thing that people always miss out is the strategy of it, is actually planning out what you want to get out of it. Because podcasting is, while it's easy enough to learn, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of moving parts. It does take a bit of time. There's planning. If you want to produce a good quality show, you do need to put a bit of resource into it, both time and money. So really, you need to make sure that you know what you're going to get out of it, because that's the only thing that's going to keep you going during the hard times. When you're struggling to get a topic for next week's show, or struggling to organise your next interview. If you know what you're going to get out of it, really, that's the main thing. So that's a big part of the planning process, is figuring out a strategy and really treating it a bit like a project, like breaking it up into sections. So saying the first 20 episodes, this is what I'm going to try to achieve. What I want to achieve is something as simple as I want to get 300 downloads per episode, or I want to get 5 bits of feedback from listeners, or I want to get 10 new email sign-ups per day from from the podcast, to get them into my business as leads. So it's that purpose. It's making something quite quantifiable that really gives you that aim and that motivation to keep going when things are tough.
I can imagine. It's so much the same as when you're setting up a business or starting your podcast as well. If you don't know what the end goal is, then you start to flail in the wind a little bit, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So and a lot of people just talk about it as brand awareness and that type of stuff. It's just a bit too vague, I think. I think you need to have quite a solid goal for your podcast, especially in the early days when the audience isn't quite there yet, and you just need that motivation.
Yeah. Actually being able to keep going when you run out of ideas at times. For you, when you're thinking about your strategy and also the episodes that you're going to have as time goes on, how far in advance do you plan your schedule?
We do it differently for each show, actually. The UK Business Startup one we've planned well in advance because it's a pretty heavily produced one. It's only 6 episodes no, 8 episodes in a series now, actually, and we'll be taking a break of at least a few months before creating the next one. So that's very well planned ahead of time. The Path of Most Resistance, for example, that's actually not really planned at all. We just find interviewees who we think suitable for the show, try and get them a few weeks ahead, at least of when we need them, and keep that going just along those kind of schedules. With Podcraft, I do a season-based show there too, but that's a bit less planned ahead. I maybe go a couple of weeks ahead in terms of thinking about the topic and then starting to plan it out. And I tend to have that. I tend to record in the same week actually with Podcraft. I don't really follow the best practices in terms of having a good buffer. So if I had a really bad week or a really busy week, I do sometimes miss a week. I'm not hugely strict with myself in terms of schedule with that one. So I think that you can take different approaches, and it depends what works for you really in terms of keeping it sustainable.
Yeah. What would you say is the optimum number of podcasts that you should have a week or a month?
I mean, the weekly one is the default. So it works in with people's schedules. They kind of, it goes to what people know because, you have TV programs that come out once a week. You have, radio shows that are on once a week, that type of thing. So it's familiar to people to expect content on a weekly basis. And it also is I think it's quite a realistic schedule to stick to as a producer as well. So it's not too onerous to spend, an hour or two every week producing something new. Whereas if you went more often than that, if you were trying to do 2 or 3 a week, that would start to be a struggle. It would start to eat into your working time. I think if you go past less than a week, so if you go to a fortnight, you're still doing it. I think people still listen to regular fortnightly shows. It's not a bad schedule to go for, but a monthly show tends to be a little bit, people kind of forget about you over the month. It's a bit too long. So weekly's good, fortnightly is fine if you think that's all you can sustain. So I think it depends what fits into your schedule.
Yeah, I guess also it depends on availability of interviewees or also the topic that you're speaking on.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it was interesting. You were saying like with the UK Business Startup podcast, you're going to have 8 episodes in a series. So you're going to have a number of a series of podcasts. And then for Podcraft, you do it in seasons. But the Path of Most Resistance is going to be, as and when you have podcast guests coming. So do you think, would it make a big difference whether you have like a series, a season, or just ad hoc podcasts as they go?
Yeah, I suppose I'm using those terms interchangeably. So a series and a season, I think of as the same thing. It's just the American version and the British version. So we talk about a TV series. When's the new series coming out of whatever show you watch? But then in the US, they talk about seasons. So it's when the new season's coming out. So actually, it's exactly the same thing. When I talk about a series or a season, I just mean the approach of following one topic, creating 10, 12, 15, 20 episodes about that topic, and then finishing up that topic and then taking a break. So you actually take a month or 2 months off to plan your next topic and then come back and do another season or series of 10, 15, 20 episodes. So it's really just that chunking, I suppose. It works really well for people who teach. So if you teach a topic, you can say, right, I'm going to teach how to use social media to market my business, and then you do an episode on each social media, and that's a season. You go through Facebook, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. That's a season for you. Or if you're entertainment, you can do a season saying like, say it's a games show, a season on games from our childhood, and you'll cover 10 to 15 games that you played when you were a child, and then it can work for all sorts of different areas, but it works really well for teaching, particularly because it's kind of how a course works, isn't it? You can design it as a course. You go from the start of a subject to the end of a subject through the season. So I think it works really well because it lends itself to repurposing too, because you can then use those seasons as resources, either deliver them as a chunk of audio, like an audiobook, or you could transcribe it into an ebook, or you could sell it as a product. Here's a full course of audio that I have on this subject. So it's really good for repurposing, for having these evergreen bits of content that you can direct people towards.
Yeah, actually, that's wonderful. Repurposing is fantastic because then you can have it in different media, and some people like to listen, some people like to read. You could even probably create videos with it as well. So
Yeah,
that's a good idea. I think this must come from your lecturing background,
Well,
the
it's fun
instructional
enough.
design.
Yeah, that's why I started doing Podcraft on a season basis, because the initial version of Podcraft was to teach people how to release their first episode. So it was just really teaching lecturers how to podcast, but in a very simple way. And the aim was simply to create one episode of your podcast. So there was 10 steps to that. It was 10-minute episodes. That was the course, essentially. So when I decided I wanted to continue that series, when I wanted to continue that podcast, make Podcraft longer than just that one series, it made sense to just continue that format and just keep doing it in the form of courses. So the second series, for example, was a course around how to use podcasting equipment. So an episode on microphones, an episode on mixers, an episode on digital recorders, and that now forms a really good resource for me to point people towards and say, you're asking about equipment, go and listen to season 2 of Podcraft and you'll learn all about it.
That's amazing. And actually, I've listened to so many, and I downloaded your guide to podcasting, the How to Podcast guide. Everything you need to reach your audience. It's great. So there's a good plug for you there. So you mentioned equipment. Now, without equipment, we cannot podcast. Is it going to be really expensive for a newbie podcaster to get into it? And what are the pitfalls to avoid? How would you even get started with considering what you need?
Yeah, so equipment's always a big issue for people because it can be perceived as quite technical, quite complicated to get involved with, and expensive, of course, because you're looking at all these shiny microphones and things. But the best thing to do with equipment is to treat it as just a tool to get your content out there. It's nothing more, and you can get really good audio quality off really simple equipment. And actually, you can make it. I mean, the quality of your podcast depends far more on how you speak, your presentation skills, and how you design your episodes, whether you create them to be really engaging and teaching and all that stuff. So your microphone really is just you want the most basic thing you require to get that content out into the world.
Okay,
so when you're when you're thinking about that, the easiest thing to do is just to get yourself a decent USB microphone, because they can be a good quality mic, but actually they're so simple to use. You just plug them into your computer and you can go.
I started out with a USB microphone, a bit like a headset, and then I wanted more and, bright, shiny objects. And now I use, and it's so exciting just looking at it. I love it. The Blue Yeti. The Blue Yeti
yes,
is
indeed,
lovely.
yes.
Yeah, because it looks like a broadcasting microphone, and it's quite exciting just having it sitting on my table. But I found that, that works really, really well. But my headset also worked pretty well too. It's just that the sound is a bit more sort of rounded and resonant when I'm using the Yeti itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, see, there's a standard path. I think you start out with a USB microphone or headset, just spending 20, 30, 40 pounds on that, and then once you know you're into podcasting, once you know it works for you, then you get involved with the equipment. You really enjoy looking at the shiny things, the gadgets, and that's when you start to spend a bit more. And you're right, the quality does jump up a little bit. So it does help you once you have a big audience, but I think you have to have that big audience to justify it in the first place.
And then what else do you need? So you need a microphone, and then you need something to record what you do. So would a computer recorder be good enough?
Yeah, absolutely. So in that simple setup, all you need is your USB mic plugged into a laptop or a computer of some sort, and that goes straight into software, something like Audacity. So Audacity is a free audio editing package. You can download that online, just search for Audacity in Google and you'll find it. And that can record and allow you to edit out your mistakes, add music, that kind of stuff. So Audacity is a great tool it's amazingly good for the fact that it costs nothing.
Oh, does it cost nothing? I don't use Audacity. I've got a Mac, so I just use GarageBand, which also costs me nothing, but easy indeed to use as well. So you need your microphone, you need your computer, and you need the software for the editing. And what's your process? Once you've recorded a podcast, what do you do? What do you do with it next?
Yeah, we record in the studio here. We've got an H5 digital recorder, which is what we record on. So there are some advantages of that. I mean, and this is talking about extra equipment that you can upgrade to. Once you've got the funds for it, if you get a digital recorder, it's just a bit more reliable. It's designed to record audio, so it's not going to crash like a computer can. Recording into software, every now and again you'll get a crash, and it is possible to lose your recording or interview, that kind of stuff. So in future, so basically for the maximum safety, we record into that recorder. We then take the SD card out of that recorder, stick it into the PC. We edit in Adobe Audition here, so it's a paid application. Audacity is actually very similar in terms of the tools it offers. It's just that Audition is much more slick. The user interface is much better. It's a bit quicker. You can set up workflows, and it's got a few more fancy tools for helping your audio. So that's really good. We edit in there. And basically, we try to keep it for the shows that aren't heavily produced, like UK Business Startup. So for the interview shows, for example, we keep it as simple as possible. I mean, when we're recording solo stuff here, I use an editing method just called the click method. So when you make a mistake, you just click your tongue a few times just into the microphone, and it's really easy to spot that on the waveform. So you can actually just skim through an episode. You can see, there must have been a mistake there, so I'll flick to there on the timeline. You'll take 2 or 3 minutes to find where it started, cut out that little bit of mistake, and then go on. And maybe there'll be 4 or 5 of those in a 20 or a 30-minute episode. You'll cut them out, and then basically we'll bring in our intro and our outro music, put them in the start and the end, then do a few different bits of processing, like equalization, like compression, make sure the volume levels are all okay for standard volume levels, and then export it, and that's it. And really, you just publish it from there onto the website.
It sounds so simple, doesn't it? So if people want to publish it onto the website, it's got to be hosted, right? So what do you recommend about hosting?
For hosting, I would recommend most people actually if you're using it for a business, you want to probably put it onto your own website. So I'm assuming if you have a business, you'll have your own website, and you can place your podcast on there, have that as the home of your podcast. You can have a little section within your website. So say you're using WordPress, which is really well designed for working with podcasts. You can have a category within WordPress, which is your podcast category, and have all your episodes in there. You'll use a plugin, something like maybe Blueberry PowerPress. That's a plugin that helps you to create the what's called an RSS feed, which is how your podcast is delivered. That's all done automatically for you, though, so you don't need to know what an RSS feed is. But from there, essentially, all you do is you create a blog post, you write the text, which summarizes what the show was about, a few resources, and you upload your audio to the PowerPress plugin. And what you want to do there is to actually link it to media hosting. So you don't want to host the audio files on your own website, because the way they're delivered and the size of them and the bandwidth that's required, it can quite easily get you banned from a standard shared host. And also just the requirements for delivery and speed and everything is just... to make sure you're giving the best listener experience, you want to use a dedicated media host. And the one I use, for example, is Blueberry. So Blueberry do great hosting. You can sign up for a package there. And that's essentially, you sign up for them, you can link that into your own website, and that's the whole process. That's all sorted for you.
Make it sound so simple, so simple. And actually, I know it actually is, because I followed your instructions. So it works really well. What about, people are always saying, okay, you've got to get onto iTunes. So what's your opinion about getting onto iTunes, or if people don't have iTunes, getting onto Stitcher Radio?
I think iTunes is essential, pretty much. 90% of the podcast listening audience out there uses iTunes as its catalogue for finding shows and subscribing to shows. The thing is, you don't even need to be people who use Apple phones, so iPhones or iPads or Apple devices, they all have a podcast app by default on their device these days. So Apple have put a podcast app on there. So the vast amount of people that use those phones, they'll have that podcast app. They'll go, oh, what's this? Click on it, and they'll start to search for shows. So you need to be in that catalogue because it's so easily available. But even outside of that, a lot of other directories, for example, a lot of the Android podcast listening apps, actually use the iTunes Store catalog as their catalog as well. So they actually just draw from that catalog because they see that as quite a definitive list of all the podcasts that are out there in the world. So by listing on iTunes, you not only reach the vast amount of people that listen via iTunes itself or the podcast listening app on iOS, you also reach all of the other podcast listening apps that draw from that catalog. But then I would encourage getting on Stitcher as well. Stitcher is a good platform. Quite a lot of people use that. It works with other devices such as Sonos speakers. A lot of the wireless speakers out there nowadays, they integrate with Stitcher quite well. And there's a few other platforms as well that you can use. Sort of TuneIn Radio, for example, that get onto internet radio platforms. So there's a few different areas. But yeah, iTunes is definitely the first stop.
And then once you've got your podcast hosted on your website and you've got it up on iTunes or Stitcher Radio and elsewhere, how would you promote your podcast?
The first stop is always, and people always kind of roll their eyes at me here, but the first stop is always at your own audience. You have to start with the people that you know, because really the way to get ranked in iTunes to begin with and to start that sort of viral sharing effect is to have a little crowd of people that help you in the first place. It's very hard to get that started yourself without some funds to put into it. So and I say people roll their eyes at me at that because it sounds obvious, but actually even I then go on to tell them, oh, okay, have you done this, this and this? And they go, oh, actually, no, I haven't. So what they've done is they've told their audience by a couple of tweets or maybe one email or something like that, but they've just said, go and listen to the show. They haven't done the next steps that take it to sort of proper promotion level. So they haven't, for example, asked people to review the show, to rate the show, and asked in a really honest and transparent way by saying, I know you enjoy my content. I really appreciate you reading and listening on a regular basis. What would really help me back, if you could just take a minute to do it, is to go and just drop a review in iTunes on the show. It can make such a difference to how visible our show is. So just actually making that quite honest appeal to people to give you some help. And then the next step is to say, and if you wouldn't mind, find one person you think would be interested in this and share it with them. Ask them to subscribe to it as well. And that makes a huge difference because the ratings and the reviews, that'll start to get you up the rankings in iTunes, and then sharing it with somebody else, obviously that starts to create that viral effect that you hope then pushes out further. And you can take it further by offering incentives. So you can say, right, on our launch month, what we're going to do is everyone that leaves a review, I'm going to choose one review at random, and I'm going to give you, the top 5 books that I recommend for growing your business, or whatever is relevant to your topic. You can find a prize, and you can run a bit of a competition around it, and that can drive those reviews and ratings, which then help you in future too. So that's what I always say is as a great first step.
That's fantastic advice. And so we've learnt from you, Colin, the equipment that we need, what sort of editing software we need, how to host. One thing that I haven't asked you is, what about headphones? Do we need headphones?
Yeah, well, it depends on your context. I mean, if you're just recording straight into a microphone, just by yourself, just talking away as a solo show, then no, you don't really need headphones at all. As long as you've got a good set of speakers to listen back on. You need something essentially to listen to your show, because you want to be able to edit it. Well, you need to be able to edit it, so you need to be able to listen back to edit out your mistakes. So if you have a good set of speakers though on your computer, then you can just do it through that. The one reason you might need headphones is if you're going to be doing Skype interviews, for example. Then you want to be able to speak through a microphone but only hear your person on the other end through the headphones, so that it doesn't set up a feedback loop. Because if you play it through your speakers and then try and speak into your microphone via Skype, then that can set up a horrible feedback loop that creates sort of horrible quality audio. So they're not necessary by any means, but they can be a useful thing, headphones.
I know my first few podcasts when I was interviewing people, I was just doing it via the computer microphone, and oh my goodness, the sound was dreadful, and I had to not even use them. And I thought, I think I need to buy some equipment. I can't just leap into this, because it's fine if you do it just for yourself, but if you're actually going to be broadcasting it, then you definitely need to have the equipment. And so now, and the thing is that I've noticed for me, I mean, really under your guidance with your how to podcast book that I've downloaded from your website, and also having a look at everything on your website, because you're so generous with the information that you share on your website with regard to equipment and what to look out for and the software and everything, that I've learnt so much. And so now I feel quite sophisticated. I'm getting there, Colin. Not perfect, but definitely getting there. So, Colin,
I'm sure you've had plenty of practice so far, so I'm sure you're more than getting there, far higher level than that.
I'm absolutely addicted. I love interviewing people. I love talking about, well, careers is my topic, so I talk about careers, but it's like you've created a beast. So what about you, Colin? So what's going to happen? What are the plans for the podcast host himself?
Right now, I'm really just planning how to grow out the company. So to turn this into an agency that creates great audio, that helps other people create great audio, and teaches people how to do it as much as possible. So at the moment, we're recruiting for somebody else. We're taking on somebody new next month, and we're looking into options how to automate a lot of things as well. So looking into software options, creating apps that will help podcasters in future. And like I said, we're talking about the audio drama podcast as well, so just sort of branching out into different areas too, and really growing the podcast host out into, I mean, my sort of big hairy goal is to make the podcast host website the most well-known, the biggest resource for podcasting on the internet. So that's my plan, and I think I'm moving towards that already. So that'll be by the end of this year, the podcast host will be far more visible, I think, and we'll be moving towards that big goal.
Colin, it sounds like it's going to be changing its name to the Podcast Empire.
Well, let's hope.
Oh, it sounds great. I'm going to follow this with great interest, because it's getting to be so varied, everything that you're offering, and it's all podcast. Obviously, it's through podcasting, but even with your mountain biking podcast, I remember when I interviewed you a few months ago, you were saying the mountain biking podcast was growing so fast because you found your niche market.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's good. It's all very well talking about podcasting, but we need to, I think it's good for us to have examples of shows that are not podcast related. So Podcraft is great, teaches people how to podcast, but it doesn't reach different audiences. So I think it's good to be able to reach those wider audiences through the mountain bike podcast, the business podcasts, the audio drama podcast, that kind of stuff. So yeah, need to branch out.
Oh, wonderful. So we've got the UK Business Startup Podcast, we've got Podcraft, we've got Path of Most Resistance, and we've got your mountain biking podcast. What's the mountain biking podcast called again?
It's called Mountain Bikes Apart.
Mountain Bikes Apart. Fantastic. Yeah. So I'm going to have all of this in my show notes on my website, janejacksoncoach.com. So if anyone wants to find out more about Colin and the podcast host, I'll have all of the links there as well. So are there any final things, snippets of information and tips that you can leave us with?
I think we've given away the basics. I mean, the last thing you want to do is load too much on people. But there was one thing actually that I do have a course, so a little 5-email course which takes people through those basics. So if you want a kind of revision of this, you want some written down information on what equipment to get, how to do that hosting, how to do a bit of editing as well, actually how to use Audacity, then by all means go and sign up for that email course. That'd be great. It's absolutely free. All you have to do is go to the domain colinpresents.com and you'll be able to sign up for it there.
Okay, fantastic. colinpresents.com. I will put that on my show notes as well, so people can go on there and learn all about podcasting. And I have to say, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Colin. Thank you so much for coming on the show again and sharing your wisdom and insights. And you know what? I'm going to have you back at the end of 2016 and you can tell me how the empire is growing.
That'd be great. So yeah, you can give me some accountability for my goals.
Oh, it's great, and hopefully I'll have lots of podcasts under my belt as well. And anyway, let's see how the podcasts grow. Thank you so much for your time. It's such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for keeping your, what was it, a Thursday morning? It's a Thursday evening here in Sydney, and you're over in Scotland. So thank you so much for your time, Colin.
No, it's been a pleasure to come on. Thanks very much.
Okay, bye.
You've been listening to Jane Jackson Careers. Sign up to receive regular career advice at janejacksoncoach.com.